Thanks so much, and thanks for allowing me to join by technology. It's very generous of you. I will try to catch up some time, so let's get started. I hope you're all caffeinated. So I'm going to tell you something about degrowth and the good life, lessons from recent research on energy use. And let us just get started. I want to give you a short reminder about the climate emergency, talking about economic and energy decoupling, which basically is not happening, and it would be really good if people were aware of that and took it seriously. Recent results from research on energy and economy and well-being, what that research translated to in terms of conclusions in the latest IPCC report I was involved with that came out, was published on April 4th, and some ideas moving forward. And then I'll look forward to the other talk and discussion. So a reminder about the climate emergency, or the climate crisis. We are in a very dangerous position, a position that no other human beings in the last 10,000 years or more have been in. Because we have left the Holocene. And so the Holocene, in the temperature range of the Holocene is shown in pink on this plot. It's very, very narrow. It's about 1 degree in range. And that was the temperature range for the last basically 12,000 years when humanity developed agriculture. So we have now pushed the planet well beyond the Holocene temperature range already. We're about at 1.2 degrees, and we're heading for 3.2 degrees according to the latest IPCC report. So we are pushing our planet well past the regime in which we could do things like stably grow food, and that should make us really be extremely, extremely alarmed. The other thing that we now know is that with beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that economic growth is the main driver for planetary breakdown. I'm just going to give a couple of references here. There was the scientist warning on affluence that I also participated in. There's a paper also on biodiversity showing that biodiversity loss is being caused by economic growth. And proposals that growth can be decoupled from environmental impacts are really a reality-free zone. And I will just point you to these references. I don't really want to discuss this. I think it's established. So we really need to talk about, excuse me, we really need to talk about other directions. So let's think, when we're thinking about other directions, let's try to think, instead of what the economy needs, let's think about what humanity needs. And when we're thinking about humanity in non-economic terms, one of the ways we like to think about it is to think about human well-being. And this can seem very fuzzy, but it's actually possible to measure it. It's actually possible to think about it. And it's possible to do research where you can look at the interdependency of energy use, economic growth, and well-being. So here are a couple of key facts about energy use and well-being, for instance. So the life expectancy, here you can have sort of a measure of physical well-being, which is life expectancy at birth, physical health. And you can see the saturation behavior. So at low levels of energy use, you really need to grow, but then at high levels of energy use, it just doesn't matter anymore. And that's over sort of almost an order of magnitude in energy levels. The other point here is decoupling. So decoupling from economic growth, decoupling of energy and the economy is not to be seen, but decoupling of energy and well-being outcomes is very clear. And this was shown in a paper that I wrote in 2010, where you see, for instance, that a high human development, which would be the purple dotted line here, costs less and less and less and less energy as time goes on. And so that's something that's obviously a positive point. And the other point here, which is sort of something that people don't really realize yet, is that growth in primary energy can only statistically account for a quarter of international life expectancy improvements. And that's a result we published in 2020. So despite the fact that we have correlation, we don't necessarily see temporal dynamic coupling, if you want to put it that way. So these things are not as dependent as people very often think they are. We can also do modeling. So based on the decent living standards of Professor Narasimha Rao of Yale University, if you haven't looked at his research, I really recommend that you do. He came up with a decent living standards energy and material services basket. And we then modeled that, and you can sort of see what it looks like here. And then we modeled it for the whole world. And you can see sort of the result, the sort of headline result on the right-hand side of the figure. And what you can see is that whereas the International Energy Agency projects, so you have our current energy use here, which is global final energy use in exajoule, several hundred exajoule right now, sort of 400, 500 range is where we are now. And they can consider that energy use will keep on going up. They have a couple of, this is a 2-degree scenario, the orange one is a 2-degree scenario, and their below 2-degree scenario is sort of a stabilization in energy. So I would say 2 degrees and below 2 degrees, the orange and yellow are both sort of stabilization scenarios. There was a previous low energy demand scenario published by Arnold Grubler that we're showing for comparison, and our work is the DLE, is this sort of green arrow at the sort of more on the lower end. And what we see is that decent living for energy for all is achievable at 40% of current energy use, despite population growth until 2050. So this is a really massive difference. If we model the energy necessary for human well-being as opposed to the energy necessary for wealth accumulation or economic growth, these are very, very different levels of energy use. And I should also add that this model is not based on speculative technologies. It's based on existing technologies. So the other main point I want to make in my talk is that provisioning systems, what we call provisioning systems, which is an object of study of a heterodox economy, not mainstream economy, provisioning systems limit the extent to which need satisfaction can be achieved at low energy use. So in a paper that was published in 2021, last year, in Global Environmental Change, we studied these provisioning factors. So we basically said, what are the factors that allow some countries, some societies to provision human needs at lower energy use, and what are some factors that make it harder? So what are factors that are beneficial to provisioning human needs, to satisfying human needs at low energy use, and what factors are detrimental? And we do this in a quantitative analysis based on an international data set. And basically, the main thing to remember here is that you have, at the lower left, you have this saturation curve that I showed you before, where you sort of have some kind of generic need satisfaction vertically versus final energy use horizontally, and you sort of see the sort of typical saturation curve. And a high value of a beneficial provisioning factor those countries will tend to be moved up compared to the others. It becomes easier for them to satisfy needs at low energy, whereas a detrimental factor of a detrimental provisioning factor will pull the curve down, will pull the countries down. It'll make it harder for those countries to satisfy human needs at low energy use. And what we can see here is that all the factors that have a lot of green bars are beneficial, basically. They're positive ones. So you can see that they include public service quality, public health coverage, trade and transport infrastructure, electricity access is massive, we couldn't even plot it, all the way access to clean fuels, urban population fraction is a bit positive, income equality is very positive, democratic quality is very positive. There were 2 parameters that just didn't matter at all: trade penetration, foreign direct investment. We couldn't see an effect either way. And then there were 2 factors that were quite detrimental, significantly so. So the first one is extractivism. This is not a surprise to anybody who's studied the resource curves for Dutch disease or whatever its many names are, but an economy that is based on environmentally extractive activities will have a harder time satisfying the needs of its population at low energy use. And the second one might be more surprising, which is economic growth. So economic growth above a moderate income level makes it harder to satisfy human needs at low energy use. And that's something that I believe we should take very seriously, that if we have economic growth, we're basically we're making the job more difficult. Above a certain income, obviously, that's an important caveat. We were able to model what improved provisioning systems could do. So based on our analysis, if we improve provisioning systems to median or sort of maximum significant value, what can that do? And we can model that it enables much higher satisfaction of human needs at lower energy use. So we can also do some modeling based on these provisioning systems. And I think one of the core things here is really that this idea of infrastructure and public services is absolutely crucial to enabling countries to allow to create the conditions of low carbon well-being, of sustainable well-being. So public services and accessible public services for all, this is something we're seeing at multiple scales all around the world, is something that really makes a huge difference here. Now, this research was taken up by the latest IPCC report. So where you can see that some of the headline conclusions here, these are graphs taken directly from the press release presentation. So when we look for, this is for the first time that an IPCC report has considered the question of energy demand and whether or not it could be reduced. So demand and services the consideration of energy demand and services allows us to bring down global emissions by 40 to 70% by 2050, with effects in absolutely every single sector. So if we can reduce demand, it really has a huge potential in terms of the necessary emissions reductions. Some of the solutions they're not new, but we can really see them show up in the models and in the estimates in terms of walking, cycling, electrified transport, reducing air travel, which is the reason I'm not with you today, adapting houses, in terms of retrofit, heat pumps, and so on. All of these make very large contributions. Lifestyle changes require systemic changes across society. So when we talk about demand reductions, we are not talking about individual behavior change. We are really talking about economic, governance, infrastructure transformations. And obviously, some people and some countries require additional resources, and that should not be forgotten. This graph is way too complicated, so I'm not going to go into it, but these are the scenarios that the IPCC report on mitigation considered, and two of them in the 1.5 degree range considered demand reductions as a core component of what they were trying to do. And so that's just to show that how important these kinds of scenarios are and these kinds of measures are, that they're really being taken seriously at a very high level. This is a plot that was shown in the supplement for the summary for policymakers. So it's a very high level summary of what we know about demand reductions. And it's a complex plot, but I'm just going to sort of explain to you what's going on in it. You have these gray bars that show where emissions will be in 2050. And the blue, red, and yellow bars show how much you can bring that down with demand-focused intervention. And what's really interesting here is that these demand-focused interventions are divided into the blue sociocultural factors, the red infrastructure use, and the yellow end-use technology. And so that gives us really a very good idea of where we need to be focusing. On the food side, I hope you're all eating your plant-based conference offerings. So nutrition, huge one is sociocultural factors. That's the sector where it's really the biggest and has the largest role to play. But in other sectors, we're really talking about huge investment in infrastructure and technology change, for instance, for transport and buildings. And I think that that's something, again, to take extremely seriously. So I think another reason why demand, and so degrowth in demand, reducing demand, and focusing on well-being and services is such an important topic is because it raises the potential of much larger engagement and democratic participation. So to enhance well-being, people demand services and not primary energy and physical resources per se. Focusing on demand for services and the different social and political roles people play broadens the participation in climate action. And just to finish, some new directions, I would say that the directions we need are much more models that focus on well-being, provision, and outcomes all around the world, including materials, energy, emissions, land use work, and the economic institutions that would go in that direction. We also need to look into the political economy of growth dependence and why we're not going in those directions, which obviously include financialization, rent seeking, state capture, and a lot of the factors that were discussed in the previous session as well. In terms of necessary directions, I think that the idea of democratizing provisioning systems is really important. So we need to bring democratic processes and institutions into the core provisioning systems necessary to reduce emissions and satisfy human needs. And this is really important for overcoming obstacles to degrowth and post-growth. And I have stopped being just a scientist. I'm now also not just a scientist, but also an activist. And I would recommend that everyone who can do such a thing should think about how they can participate as well. I think it's a question of our scientific integrity. If we believe that these problems are real, we have to act on them. And it's also a question of standing with our students, standing with the people around the world who are really being suffering and being penalized and criminalized for this kind of democratic activity. Thank you so much.